Seeing quorum in the room, I would like to call this meeting to order. I wish to acknowledge that our meeting is taking place on unceded Algonquin territory, and I would like to thank the Algonquin Nation for hosting us on their land. I'm looking for a motion to approve the agenda, please. Trustee Schwartz, seconded by Trustee Blackburn. Any discussion on the agenda this evening? If there is none, I'll call the question on the agenda as presented. All those in favor and opposed, and the motion is carried. Turning now to Trustee Bronovan for the report from board in camera, if possible.
The board met in camera this evening and approved and recommends a recommendation with regards to, usually I get I know, but it's not up there. So I'm usually told what to call the in-camera items, and I don't want to just say what it is because we just talked about it in camera. So are we saying that? We are?
Well, it's been said.
I was pretty sure that's not. We're saying that publicly? Because then why did we are now? Okay, thanks. That was what I thought we weren't saying. So, okay. So the board met the board to authorize staff to proceed as directed in board in camera with respect to the acquisition of a student information system.
And you did say you seconded that, Trustee Bronovan? Thank you. The discussion was held in camera, so I will call the question with a recorded vote. All those in favor?
Trustee Boothby, Trustee Blackburn, Trustee Huff, Trustee Campbell, Trustee Ellis, Trustee Jenkins, Trustee Penny, Trustee Lyra, Trustee Bronovan, Trustee Schwartz, Trustee Scott.
And opposed? And that is carried unanimously. Thank you very much. Is there anything else, Trustee Bronovan?
That concludes my report.
Thank you. Tonight, I do have a short briefing. First, the OCDSB Volunteer Appreciation, Reception, and Community Recognition Awards will take place at the Confederation Education Center located at 1645 Woodruff Avenue on the 13th of June 2019 at 6 p.m. Please join us as we celebrate the valuable contributions of all our volunteers and celebrate our 2019 Community Recognition Award winners and the nominees at this annual appreciation event. This is our chance to show how thankful we are for the contributions that our volunteers make every day, supporting students, staff, and our schools. It's a wonderful opportunity to connect with our communities and show our appreciation for the significant and valued work that our volunteers do every day. The second item tonight is with regard to our strategic plan. We are currently seeking feedback on the draft strategic plan for the next 4 years, 2019 to 2023. The new plan is about building a culture of innovation, a culture of caring, and a culture of social responsibility. And it recognizes culture as a key driver of change.
Mark Fisher has joined.
And I would invite everyone to share your thoughts on the draft strategic plan by June the 7th, 2019. Information is on the OCDSB website. And finally, the Canada Green Building Council and the Canada Coalition for Green Schools are looking for schools that are weaving sustainability education into their curriculum and bringing programs and activities to students that encourage awareness about the environment. The winning school will receive $2,000 in prize money to use for a green activity and the coveted title of greenest school in Canada. It would be great to know that the greenest school in Canada was right here in the Ottawa-Carleton District School Board. The deadline to apply for this is the 15th of June, 2019. And that's all of my briefing for tonight. Are there any questions? If not, I'll turn to the director for her briefing this evening.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. This information is to just bring to the attention of our trustees and community that the 2018-19 school year, rather the 2019-20 school year calendar has been approved by the ministry. School year calendars are distributed to all students at the beginning of each school year. The school year calendar lists school holidays and other important dates. Staff will present the 2019-20 staff recommended budget at Committee of the Whole budget meeting on Wednesday, May 29th, that's tomorrow, beginning at 7 p.m. Community members who would like to make a delegation are encouraged to attend. We will be accepting requests for 4-minute delegations until 4 o'clock on Wednesday. Delegations registering just prior to the start of the meeting will be granted up to 2 minutes to speak. Delegations will also be heard at the Committee of the Whole meetings on June the 3rd and June the 10th. And the 14th Annual Student Recognition Awards will take place on Thursday, May the 30th, again this week. Secondary students will be recognized for their will to succeed, their dedication to finish what they started, and their commitment to achieve their personal best. This year's winners will be posted on the district's website. That's for all my report. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Director. Are there any questions for the Director? If not, we have no delegations this evening, which brings us on to matters for action, beginning with confirmation of the board minutes from the 23rd of April 2019 at Folio 1 in your package. A mover to confirm, Trustee Schwartz, seconded by Trustee Boosby. Are there any errors or omissions? Trustee Boothby.
Thank you, Chair. On page 9, where it says report from OPSPA representatives, the 6th line down, it said it is their intention to rewrite the motion. It should say it is our intention. We're doing the rewrites, not OPSPA. Thank you.
Thank you for that, Trustee Boothby. If there's nothing else, then I will call the question to confirm the minutes as amended. All those in favor?
Fisher in favor.
And opposed? And that motion is carried. Next item, any business arising from the board minutes? Seeing none, I will look to Trustee Bronovan to present the Committee of the Whole report from the 7th of May 2019.
Are we not confirming the special board minutes first?
Thank you for reminding me. I skipped right over that. We do need to confirm the special board minutes, which are at Folio 11 in your package. Do we have a mover for that? Trustee Boothby, seconded by Trustee Jenkins. Any errors or omissions in that set of minutes? Seeing none, I'll call the question on receipt of the board minutes from the 7th of May. All those in favor? And opposed? And that motion is carried. And there was no business arising from those minutes either? So that does bring me back to Trustee Bronovan. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Committee of the Whole met on the 7th of May 2019, and on a motion by Trustee Boothby that I will second, it was recommended that the revisions to p.073.gov attached as Appendix A to Report 19-050 be approved as amended, effective immediately following the appointment of an Integrity Commissioner, attached as Appendix A, And,
Trustee Bronovan, I hate to interrupt
oh,
you
you
in
want
the
me
middle
to
of
wait
reading
for
a
them to
long
say that we
motion,
received them?
but we do need to receive the
Oh,
Committee of the Whole
sure.
report. Need to move receipt first.
I'd like to move receipt.
Do we have a seconder for receipt? Trustee Blackburn, any errors or omissions? Seeing none, I'll call the question on receipt. All those in favor
Fisher in favor.
and opposed? And the motion is carried. And back to you, Trustee Bronovan. And no, you don't probably
not
have
rereading that.
to read that all over again.
And that B, the role of the ad hoc committee be expanded to include the development of a policy and a request for proposal to support the appointment of an integrity commissioner.
And that motion, I believe, was approved at the special board meeting on the 7th of May, the same evening.
There were no other recommendations.
Thank you very much. And we also have a partial report from the Committee of the Whole meeting of the 21st of May, which was chaired by Trustee Jenkins. Trustee Jenkins, would you like to move receipt? And we need a seconder for receipt. Trustee Penny will second that. Are there any errors or omissions in the partial report? And if there are none, I'll call the question on receipt of the partial report. All those in favor? And opposed?
Fisher in favor.
And that motion is carried. And I believe that there is one recommendation in the report, Trustee Jenkins, on folio 52.
Yes, there was.
So if you would like to read the recommendation, and if you're going to, who moved it, and if you're going to second it, to agree to second it, then we'll move right on.
So it was moved by Trustee Campbell, and yes, I will second it, that staff prepare a report for board discussion in early fall 2019, comparing the current and projected student enrollment numbers of the elementary English Core French programs with the elementary early and middle French immersion programs, including 1, enrollment for special education, non-gifted English language learners, ELL, and SES, all disaggregated by grade, division, and program, co-location, nature, and 2, contribution rates to high school pathways disaggregated by program, co-location, nature, and B, that this report additionally identify any key operational, financial, pedagogical, community impacting or other strategic advantages and/or disadvantages related to its findings, and 2, any major programming, accommodations, poly-resourcing, and/or other strategic changes which might be expected to significantly and reliably address any concerns identified.
Thank you for that. Is that a consent item? It would appear that it is a consent item. And we do have some more reports to deal with, but I think in the interest of not having to turn the agenda page back and forth from one side to the other, I will call the question on this recommendation now. This will be a recorded vote. All those in favor?
Trustee Boothby, Trustee Blackburn, Trustee Huff, Trustee Campbell, Trustee Ellis, Trustee Jenkins, Trustee Penny, Trustee Lyra, Trustee Schwartz,
Trustee Fisher in favor.
Trustee Fisher, Trustee Scott.
And opposed? And abstentions?
Trustee Bronovan.
And that motion is carried. Moving on then with our agenda, next item is the Committee of the Whole Budget Report from the 16th of April 2019. Trustee Penny?
I'd like to move receipt of the report, Madam Chair.
And do we have a seconder for receipt? Trustee Boothby? Any errors or omissions in this report? If there are none, I'll call the question. All those in favor?
Fisher in favor.
And opposed? And that motion is carried. Are there any recommendations, Trustee Penny?
None, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Next up, we have a report from the Advocacy Strategy Committee from the 17th of April 2019.
I'd like to move receipt of the report.
Thank you, Trustee Bronovan. Do we have a seconder for receipt? Trustee Huff? Are there any errors or omissions in this report? If none, I'll call the question on receipt. All those in favor of receipt? And opposed? And that motion is carried. Trustee Bronovan, I believe you have another report.
Yes, I'd like to move receipt of the Advocacy Strategy Committee from the 22nd of May.
And do we have a seconder for that one? Trustee Lyra, are there any errors or omissions in that report? If there are none, again, I will call the question on receipt. All those in favor?
Fisher in favor.
And opposed? And that motion is carried. Trustee Bronovan?
There is one recommendation coming out of that report on a motion by Trustee Huff that I will second, that the OCDSB feedback on the Ministry of Education's School Board Hiring Practices Consultation Guide and the Class Size Consultation Guide be approved as amended. See attached as appendices A and B.
And no, you don't have to read the entire submission.
Oh, thank you.
I thought you'd appreciate that, and I think so everyone else will as well. So the motion itself is at the bottom of page folio 73. The appendix begins on folio 75. Is this a consent item? Is that a head shake? This is not a consent item, so we will deal with it when we reach the consent items below. And the next item on the agenda then will be the report from the ad hoc committee for the board and director evaluation process on the 22nd of May 2019. Trustee Schwartz, are you moving receipt? And that will be seconded by Trustee Huff. And are there any errors or omissions in this report? Trustee Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The minutes are very good, and I've lost my page. But I do recall I reviewed the minutes previously, and I do recall a conversation that we had that came up. It was a rich conversation we all had. But in terms of the proposal to form the board work plan subsequent to the staff work plan for the year, and I guess concern I had raised about the sequencing of those events and how things would work if staff had already been tasked to effectively 100% capacity by the time the board set its work plan. There being effectively a concern about either the staff work plan drives the board work plan, or there's a lag in terms of any board work required, or staff work would have to be displaced. It's just it's a sequencing issue. My understanding, my takeaway from the conversation was that there was a consensus agreement that this would be ironed over and effectively dealt with by means of rich and ongoing dialogue, which was satisfactory to me as long as that occurs. But I don't think it was fully captured in the minutes.
The paragraph in question is on folio 84. If you want to have a quick look at it, just in case what is there now sort of
So thank you.
captures the
It
intent, but
touches
not
on
the
it. It doesn't
detail?
really capture, I think, some of the conversation we had around that, and especially the agreement to, in a sense, deal with the structural issue by means of rich dialogue. I think that's not captured. And that was my key. Thank you.
Thank you. So with that addition, along those lines, I will call the question then on receipt of this report. All those in favor? And opposed? And that motion is carried. And there is one recommendation in the report, and I will ask Trustee Schwartz if she could put that forward and second it, since she moved receipt.
Sure. So that the evaluation process, job description, and performance assessment guide be used for the 2019-2020 evaluation of the Director of Education as outlined in Report 19-058 be approved.
And that was moved by Trustee Bronovan. Are you seconding it?
Yes.
And seconded by Trustee Schwartz. Is this a consent item? And I'm seeing no objections, so I will call the question on this item. All those in favor on a recorded vote?
Fisher in favor.
Trustee Fisher, Trustee Boothby, Trustee Blackburn, Trustee Huff, Trustee Campbell, Trustee Ellis, Trustee Jenkins, Trustee Penny, Trustee Lyra, Trustee Bronovan, Trustee Schwartz, Trustee Scott.
And opposed? And abstentions? And that motion is carried unanimously. So that brings us to our non-consent items. And the non-consent item we are dealing with, the motion is on folio 73. The appendix referred to in the motion begins on folio 75. And Trustee Huff, would you like introduction as the mover? So no introduction. Trustee Bronovan?
I'd like to move that we move into rules of committee for this discussion.
Is there a seconder for moving into rules of committee? Trustee Campbell, all those in favor of moving into rules of committee? And opposed, and that is carried. So we are now in rules of committee. The clock is running at 3 minutes per person, and you may speak more than once to the motion. So in terms of the motion and the debate that's on the floor, did you wish to enter the debate at this time, Trustee Bronovan? Other speakers to the motion? Trustee Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm generally very happy with the hiring practices and most of the class size recommendation. Under, I guess, the proposed reply to question 2, though, with respect to class size, and I recognize that class composition is nicely dealt with under the answer to question 3, but with respect to the answer to question 2, the first bullet ends with the expression of the concern, which I've certainly heard before and understand, I believe, that effectively school organization, if I can summarize, would be easier and be made more flexible without the constraint of a hard cap. And I understand the general logic. That's effectively the sense of that first bullet. That makes sense. But I guess my question, and I don't know if someone gave me the sense that the discussion was occurred at the committee or if this was considered. It certainly strikes me that if there was a hard cap that was sufficiently elevated so as not to cause important problems, or if there was maybe a hard cap, but a soft cap, allowing for some variability, that these might be options as well with respect to school organization and class size flexibility. Indeed, I believe in previous discussions and reports from our HR staff and others, it's been in fact argued that we wouldn't want to have classes that were more than 30 or 32 or this number or that number, either for JK or SK or this group or that group and the other thing. So I do believe that even our own staff have at least a notional idea of what is too big a class. So I guess since that is sort of a generally held view, I guess I'm not understanding what the concern is and why a hard cap or softened cap was not considered as an additional alternative possibility with respect to our feedback.
Thank you for that comment, Trustee Campbell. I'm hopeful that those who participated in the committee discussion will be able to have comment as we move through the speakers list. However, it might be instructive to have comment from staff if that is feasible. Director?
If I could ask Superintendent McCoy if you have any commentary.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair, I guess a couple of points in response to Trustee Campbell's comments. I think it's certainly true that in the past, trustees would have heard staff talk about the fact that we would consider certain sizes of classes to be unacceptable. I think what the bullet goes to is that it goes to leaving it to individual districts to determine what those notional class size maximas would or should be, and to some extent that might vary not just based on the district but also based on different programs or based on other criteria. I guess the other thing is perhaps accompanied by an average class size across the district, but again the question might be what would the right class size cap be that would not impose some restrictions. So I think it just goes to leaving it to districts to determine locally what that notional class size cap might be, if you will.
Trustee Campbell?
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. I do appreciate the need for district flexibility to deal with issues. I guess I'm not thoroughly understanding the aversion to a cap. Funding doesn't necessarily mean class size. They can be separated as issues. And hard caps can be softened and hard caps can be sufficiently elevated. I'll leave it at that, but the answer is helpful. Thank you.
Other speakers to the motion? Trustee Penny.
I think if I remember correctly, the committee was trying to deal with the essence of the issue, which is not necessarily the cap size, but talking about relating it back to the essential item, which is the funding. Because yes, you can have funding separate from your cap size, but that means that we have to absorb the differences, right? So that's really what I think we were trying to tie it to, is really saying that, not only is if you're going to cap it, then you should provide the full funding, which it really isn't even at this time. So that's really the essence of what we're talking about.
Thank you. If I may.
I have no one else on my list at the moment, Trustee Campbell.
Thank you. I appreciate Trustee Penny's reply. Elsewhere in the report, we do advocate for funding at a different level than size. I mean, so I think there is a recognition we can separate these matters, but I'll leave it there. Thank you very much.
And I have Trustees Boothby and then Trustee Lyra. Trustee Boothby.
Thank you. So thanks to staff for putting this together so quickly. There's a couple of things that I'd like to see. So in the draft that we got, the key goals were actually written down, and I think that would be really important because I'd like the ministry people who read this to actually have that in their mind. So we've got that in several places where we talk about what the key goals are. Also
Would you
on
like to
page...
move that as
Sorry?
an amendment, because we're not just dealing with suggestions here?
Okay.
This
Okay.
is board, this is going to be final approval, so if you would like to propose that that be added.
Mark
in
Fisher.
strategic places.
Okay.
Has left.
Yes, if I could make that a motion, please.
Just give
how
me a second
specific
here
do
to
I
get
need to be?
some wording.
So add in number 1 to both, to all 3 of the topics, what the key goals are. So add to the narrative in each of the 3 topics what the key goals are.
Including hiring practices?
Yes,
they're
because
just
I
the-
would like the
okay.
government to know what they asked us to talk about.
So that is what is being proposed. Is there a seconder for this amendment? Trustee Huff will second it. Does everyone understand what is being proposed here? Perhaps then we should have some clarification.
Okay, when we had this report, and I do have the pages here, that staff initially gave to us, and we were discussing this, we actually had what those key goals were in front of us so that we could refer back to them when we were making our comments. And I would like to know that the government staff will actually read all these as one particular package, rather than just say, oh, okay, but not understand what the key goals are. So I'm not sure what else people would like to hear. So for instance, under the class size, the 4 key goals were student achievement, protecting frontline staff, fiscal responsibility, and evidence-based decision-making.
So everyone is clear. So now that that is understood, I will ask, is this amendment friendly? And I'm seeing a head saying no, so any further introduction, Trustee Boothby?
I'll just note that I found these very helpful, and I just would like to ensure when the government is reading our submission that if there's some question about what we are talking about, they can refer back to it. And we did try and craft our submissions in that meeting to tether back to the key goals.
And on my speakers list, I have Trustee Bronovan.
Thank you. I just maybe a clarification, but my understanding was that those 4 key goals were the government's 4 key goals and not our core key. So I then assume that they know what they are and they don't need us to, because I also thought we had a word count that we were working within. And so I'm not passionately opposed to putting extra words in there. I just see them as a bit unnecessary considering it would be the government's words.
Thank you, Trustee Bronovan. Other discussion on this? Back to Trustee Huff.
I actually think as a presentation style that it's not a bad idea to reframe what we're reflecting on and to make that very clear. I know it is their words, it is their questions, but to show that we have put that there purposely to tether our responses to it really is an excellent presentation style mechanism.
Thank you. Any further debate on the amendment? Trustee Penny, did I just see? Trustee Boothby, then we're back to you for wrap-up.
Okay, if I could ask a question of staff, are we limited to our word count?
I'd have to double check on the word count. I'm not certain if we are, but we certainly can reference that we developed the submission in response to the goals the government outlined in our covering letter if the amendment doesn't carry.
Okay. So as Trustee Huff said, I think it is very important because we don't know who at the ministry is going to be looking at this submission, and I would like it abundantly clear to them that we understood what the parameters were going into this consultation.
Thank you, Trustee Boothby. So I will call the question on the amendment. All those in favor of the amendment? And opposed? And abstentions? So the amendment is carried, which brings me back to my main list with Trustee Evans next. Trustee Lyra, sorry.
On page 79, bullet 3, we talk about challenges faced by rural students or students from low socioeconomic circumstances. I think it important to also highlight that students from new Canadian families or students who didn't grow up with technology are going to face a more difficult time in e-learning than their Canadian counterparts. I'm open to suggestions on what kind of words I would put into an amendment because I am not thinking super great because I'm sick, but I do think it's really important that in that bullet we also highlight people from new Canadian families, people who didn't grow up with technology, and we work together to find some way to phrase that. So I'm not going to propose it as an amendment, but I would appreciate it if we could sort of wordsmith this together.
If I may make a suggestion from the chair, Trustee Lyra, are you looking at the issue of limited access to the technology or the overall thing, or are you looking at the particularly acute for end of it?
The particularly acute end.
So why don't you think about some words and we can put you back on the list?
Okay.
And next on my list, I have Trustee Bronovan and Trustee Schwartz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just in the similar veins, or within the section of number 2 under grades 9 to 12, page 79, I'm not quite sure what additional language to add, but I think it's under the second bullet where the experience of the OCDSB has demonstrated that e-learning may not be a viable or desirable option for all learners. I know through family who actually teaches e-learning in another board, that part of the challenge is for some students that just it isn't a suitable way of learning. They just can't learn online. So I'm not sure if that entirely comes out in that bullet. I think that's what's intended, but I think not quite sure how to clarify that point. And then the last bullet around the funding models, where there's the quotation marks of e.g. providing adequate technological resources. I'm wondering if we could actually spell out the kinds of resources. Do we mean computers for all kids? Do we mean Wi-Fi access for all? I'm not quite sure. So I'm thinking of it from a ministry perspective. If I was receiving this, there's a few points that I feel are not necessarily as clear as they could be for those in receipt, to make sure that it's absolutely understood what we mean as our board, what our needs would be from a technological perspective. I mean, I think it's fine as written. I'm just not, I think we could be a bit clearer. And I know that it would be for me to amend. And I'm trying to think of the words to use.
Thank you, Trustee Schwartz, for that. I have Trustee Ellis next.
On the e-learning, I'm wondering if the Advocacy Committee considered including nonprofit as deliverables. if they considered that might be a P3 solution, and that we would like to see it as a nonprofit or keep it in the public realm.
We have any information at all on that, Madam Director?
Through you, Madam Chair, no, that wasn't an item that was contemplated. It certainly could be something that could be researched, but I wouldn't have information at hand. I'm not sure if Superintendent Lehman is present, if you had anything you could offer to the conversation. So again, this was something, Trustee, that had not been contemplated in the conversation.
Anything further, Trustee Ellis?
Yeah, so considering an amendment there, but let me move on to on page 76, under number 3. Are there alternative approaches that you would like to put forward to achieve government's 5 goals? The second bullet reads, develop in consultation with OPSPA and local boards, and I'd like to make an amendment and add the words and federations and unions after local boards.
On folio 76, a proposed amendment. Is there a seconder for the amendment to add reference to federations and unions to the second bullet under number 3? Do we have a seconder for that? Trustee Lyra will second that. Any further introduction, Trustee Ellis?
Yes, it's just, you know, our unions and federations are important partners. This affects directly them, and I think if they were at least consulted, it would be important for moving forward in a positive manner. Thank you.
Thank you. Is this amendment friendly? I'm not seeing any objection. Oh, it is not friendly, Trustee Blackburn? So it is open to debate. Anything else, Trustee Ellis, or I'll open my list. Speakers on this amendment. On the amendment by Trustee Ellis to add reference to federations and unions. Trustee Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I appreciate Trustee Ellis bringing this forward. I had actually written that in myself. It's sort of funny. I think that federations are an obvious stakeholder, and you consult and develop PPMs and regulations and legislation, other things in consultation with your major stakeholders. To me, it's natural, and that should be added in. Thank you.
Thank you for that. I have no other speakers. To Trustee Blackburn.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, I don't disagree with what was just said, but at the end of the day, it's a decision that the board is to make. So I think it should stay as it is.
Actually, a PPM is a decision the province makes.
Okay, but that we have to live with as a board. Sorry.
Thank you for that. Trustee Penny.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm just, maybe just a brief history of this particular item is one that was fraught with difficulties because it was a negotiated item previously and resulted in a very large impact. And so to then put this back into the hands of a negotiation would be, I think, the wrong thing to do.
Trustee Lyra.
So I see a consultation and a negotiation as different things. I think that you can hear somebody out and you can consult with them, and then without having to like immediately agree with everything that they say. And so I'm going to be supporting the motion brought forward by Trustee Ellis because I think that we should be consulting with all of our strategic stakeholders.
And I have no other speakers. Wrap up, Trustee Ellis.
Thank you. To develop a PPM is it's a notice from the province. It has some legal weight, but not the same as a negotiated contract or statute. So, I think, I read this as we're suggesting to the province that when they develop a PPM to help set out principles for hiring, equity, fairness, and transparency, that they might want to check in with our partners, the federations and the unions, at least as they consider what they're going to send out. I think I'm thinking of our board and for me personally as well in supporting our partners, our teachers, our custodians, the office administrators, that when something that's going to affect them so directly, that we at least encourage the province to talk to them. So I hope you'll support this amendment. Thank you.
So I will call the question on the amendment. Everyone understands what it is, and it's up there to add the words "and federations and unions." All those in favor of the amendment? And opposed? And abstentions? And the amendment is carried. So thank you. Anything else, Trustee Ellis?
That will do me. Thank you.
And I'm just looking at my speakers list here. I have Trustee Schwartz, and then Trustee Lyra, and Trustee Schwartz.
Thank you. I worked out some wording for page 79, the last bullet. So I propose to amend the last bullet in that section. So the first sentence is fine. So funding models should recognize that local boards will have additional costs supporting students as they engage in the e-learning model, and must be accompanied by sufficient and full funding for boards to provide adequate technological resources for students, or period, just after resources is fine. And then
Could you please repeat that? And this is the last bullet in the top section on folio 79?
79, correct. So after e-learning model, and must be accompanied by sufficient and full funding for boards to provide technical, I wouldn't say adequate, just to provide technological resources for all students.
And do we have a seconder for that amendment? Trustee Lyra will second it. So further introduction, Trustee Schwartz.
Since we don't yet know what the e-learning model is necessarily going to be, I think we just want to make sure that we signal to the ministry that if they're going to put in place e-learning across the system, across the province, that they have to make sure that they're putting in place sufficient and full funding so that the students themselves, so that we can provide our students with technologies, computers, laptops, and so forth, in order for them to succeed in e-learning. And so perhaps not expanding on what the technologies ought to be, that at least that we get that we're signaling that we will need this to be fully funded, not that funding models should recognize that there will be additional costs, just saying to the ministry, you need to fund this if you're going to do it.
Thank you for that. Is this amendment friendly? And I'm seeing no objection, so it is a friendly amendment and will be included. And that brings me on to Trustee Lyra.
I have worked out some wording.
Go ahead.
Second bullet, page 79, I'm going to change the period after learners to a comma, and then especially for students, comma, such as many new Canadians, comma, who did not grow up with technology or with limited access to technology.
Sorry, on which bullet?
Second bullet. No, third bullet. No, second bullet. Second bullet.
So you are looking at the second bullet?
Yes.
And do we have a seconder for this?
Up there, it should say such as new Canadians. Such as new Canadians who did not grow up with technology or with limited access to technology.
And
Thank you.
Did I identify who was seconding this one? Trustee Ellis, did you want to second this? And now that everybody can see it, to add the words especially for students such as new Canadians who did not grow up with technology or with limited access to technology. Is this a friendly amendment?
There should be a second comma after Canadians. Thank you.
And I'm going to ask for staff comment on this one, please.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair. I just feel the need to make a cautionary comment in regards to the wording because structures such as, especially for students such as new Canadians who did not grow up with technology or limited access to technology, makes a presumptuous statement about new Canadians. And in fact, there may be many new Canadians who are actually quite familiar with technology, and so the perception about a statement like that might not be one that's readily acceptable from many of our new Canadian communities. So I think we just need to be careful. I understand the intent, but it may not be received by such communities in that manner.
The word...
Trustee Lyra?
Sorry, we lost one of the words. So in between as and the first new Canadians, there should be the word some.
Through you, Madam Chair, I'll be reserved in my comments, but I remain cautious about the wording.
So did we already have a seconder for this or not? Yes, we had Trustee Ellis will second. And we are asking, is this friendly or does this need to be debated? It is not friendly, so the floor is open for debate. I think between your two rounds you've had, did you want to add anything further to your introduction, Trustee Lyra?
I think it's important that we highlight that there will be people who did not grow up with technology somewhere in this part, and that completing e-learning or online courses is going to be particularly difficult for them. I have struggled with the wording on this. I'm sorry.
I've got quite a list here. So Trustee Huff, then Trustee Boothby, Trustee Blackburn, Trustee Campbell. So Trustee Huff, starting with you, and Trustee Jenkins.
Okay, thank you. I think that this could very simply be taken care of by removing these such as some new Canadians from that sentence, because really, especially for students, regardless of whether they're from rural communities or another country, if they've not had, or a family that doesn't approve of technology, just having an open statement that says, especially for students who did not grow up with technology or with limited access to technology, adequately captures the essence of what we're trying to communicate.
Are you moving a sub-amendment?
I'm moving a sub-amendment that we remove that clause that refers to such as some new Canadians, with the
And
commas as well.
Do we have a seconder for the sub-amendment? Trustee Schwartz. Is the sub-amendment friendly?
We have a staff comment?
Madam Director?
Through you, Madam Chair, I think that the removal of the new Canadians component certainly would address the concern.
So I will ask again, is this friendly?
So this,
You have to
It's a
say
yes or
yes
no
or no.
question?
If it's not, we'll debate it. If it is,
Then,
we will let it be in this.
sure, we can make this friendly.
Thank you for that. So that brings us back to the amendment as sub-amended. And I still have on my list Trustee Boothby.
Sorry, catch me up. So we did sub-amend this,
The
and that was
sub-amendment
carried.
was
That was my
accepted.
comment. Thank you.
And Trustee Blackburn?
As you can take me off.
On the amendment as sub-amended?
No, I don't have any comments.
And Trustee Campbell? And Trustee Jenkins?
So I'm in agreement to remove as some new Canadians.
That's already been removed.
Okay, so my suggestion is to simplify it completely and just say the OCDSB will take steps to ensure all students have access to technological equipment.
This is being added to the second bullet, which talks about the experience of the OCDSB has demonstrated that e-learning may not be a viable or desirable option for all learners.
Period. OCDSB will take steps to ensure all students have access.
That wouldn't be a sub-amendment to this. That would be a whole new concept. Because this is really about identifying students who find it difficult, so that the province understands that, rather than saying what we would do if they gave us more money.
But you're pinpointing out new Canadians.
No,
so you've
gone.
removed
That's
all
not
that,
part of
but
this.
you're who have limited access to technology. So by
No, who've grown up, who come to school with that. So that makes it more difficult for them if they have no prior experience.
okay.
So I think the issue of providing technology is in the last bullet in that section. But this is looking at the students for whom it is difficult. Okay? On the amendment still, Trustee Schwartz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just want to turn trustees' attention to the third bullet, which actually says students with limited access to the technology and the internet will face significant barriers to their learning. So it's a rather redundant point to have this in section 2 and then repeated in the third bullet. So perhaps, if trustees will bear with me for a moment, that in fact the amendment should be on the third bullet to actually just put in students who did not grow up with technology. So if you put it into that section, you're actually saying students with limited access to the technology and the internet and those who did not grow up with the technology will face significant barriers to their learning. I just think it's redundant to have it twice.
Well, there is a procedural solution to this. Well, actually, there are a couple of them. At this stage, we have an option. We could defeat the amendment, and then trustee Lyra or another trustee could move the amendment proposed, which would modify the third bullet. Or alternatively, if trustee Lyra thought it would make sense to make this change, trustee Lyra could ask permission to withdraw her amendment and then proceed to make the amendment to the third bullet as opposed to the existing amendment that's on the floor, which is to the second bullet. Would we like to take a 3-minute recess here to consult on this and perhaps work something out so that we don't have to spend half an hour debating it further?
Yes.
So I'm going to call a recess for about 3 minutes. Pardon? Are you going to have it? Sandra. Sorry.
Understand.
Oh, absolutely. I wanted to get it out of that bullet. That's not the bullet where it belongs. It always belongs in the next bullet. And it is resigned. So I'm going to sort that out. I have an amendment of my own that I would like I would like to put to the second bullet would be to add those who are hired.
And that's a good point.
They're self-selected, and they are still throwing up their hands in despair. And they wanted to do it, and it just doesn't work for them.
I know.
I'll kick you if you're getting too political.
Yeah, and you know what?
But with my shoes off, so we'll be okay.
But the reason that I want to.
No, I was really glad you spoke up on that, and I thought it was better for you to do it.
Absolutely. Like that. Well, so it's just, that's fine. So every now and again, I'll slip you things. Should I talk? And if you kick me, then the answer is no.
But you can always elbow me. You get to elbow the chair whenever. How are they doing, Rob?
They're doing okay. I'm a little bit concerned because the one bullet is about the nature of the learner. Second bullet is about access to technology. These are different points.
Right.
So trying to push mash them together, I'm not so sure.
And I want to.
But I was really happy
I'm
that
gonna
that comma
tell
got
you-
put in earlier.
Can I ask people to return to their seats, please? Could people please return to their seats? Now? So I'd like to call the meeting back to order after a very productive recess and go first to Trustee Lyra.
I would like to withdraw the motion that I have on the floor.
And is there agreement that the amendment that is currently on the floor be withdrawn? I'm seeing heads nodding all around the table. So Trustee Lyra. Trustee Schwartz, did you have a question?
I just want to make a point that on the screen it should actually say that the third bullet.
There's a dispute as to whether
Oh,
it is
pardon
the
me.
fourth bullet in the section. It's the fourth bullet in the section. It is the third bullet on the page.
Sorry.
So Trustee Lyra, since we seem to be agreeable that you should be allowed to withdraw your amendment, did you have something else you wish to propose?
I would like to propose an amendment that has been kindly written on the screen, that the entirety of bullet 4 in the section read, students who did not grow up with technology and students with limited access to technology or the internet will face significant barriers to their learning within the e-learning model. The challenges will be particularly acute for rural students and for students in low socioeconomic circumstances.
And do we have a seconder for this amendment? Trustee Schwartz will second that. Is there any introduction required after all of this? And is this by any chance friendly? And I am seeing nods all around the table. So this amendment is approved as friendly. And we will, Trustee Lyra, you were the last speaker on my list, and I am going to ask Trustee Bronovan if she would please take the chair.
Yep.
And I would like to speak to this motion and propose yet one more amendment. And that is also on folio 79 of our package to the second bullet on folio 79, which is bullet 3 of the section, to add at the end of this the phrase, even those who are highly motivated.
Is that friendly?
Need a
Appears
seconder.
friendly.
Need a seconder.
Is there? Oh, I need a seconder. Thank you, Trustee Blackburn. And it's friendly.
And it's friendly, and that concludes my need to speak.
You can have the chair back.
Further speakers to the motion. Trustee Boothby.
Thank you. On page 78, the fourth button underneath class size questions for grade 9 through 12, I'd like to propose we add to the end of that sentence, potentially requiring a 5th year to fill prerequisites.
So to add the words potentially requiring a 5th year, do we have a seconder for that amendment? Trustee Blackburn. And is that amendment friendly?
I think there's some confusion as to where that's going.
It's at the very end of which bullet, Trustee Boothby?
The fourth bullet, so it says, the last sentence is, school administrators will have to make difficult choices as to whether and how often these courses can be offered, particularly in smaller secondary schools where it's already challenging to offer a full complement of compulsory courses every year, potentially requiring a fifth year to fulfill prerequisites.
And is this friendly? I'm not seeing any objection.
So it looks like you're editing what we just passed.
Sorry, question one.
Okay.
Yes, you did.
So you changed the wrong piece. That should be question 2 there, bullet 4. And then the next one is question 1, bullet 3. Yeah.
So did we agree that this was friendly and we've got it sorted out what the language is?
Sorry, the change I just proposed is actually bullet 4.
I also believe that you changed bullet in the motion that we just passed, put forward by Trustee Scott. It says bullet 4. I believe it's bullet 3.
I'm going to declare another recess to allow staff to catch up and to allow everybody to sort out their brain for 5 minutes. It's better to pause before we get too mixed up here. was carried friendly. Okay, I think we're back in business here, so I would like to call our meeting back to order. That one was just carried, it was friendly. So do we have, that was the end of my list. So that then brings me back to Trustee Huff for wrap-up. We're done. Do you want to make any concluding remarks about supporting the motion?
How about this? None required.
I like that. Thank you. None required. So I will just give Trustee Lyra, welcome back. We did proceed because we're all caught up. We have finished our debate. Trustee Huff has had her wrap-up opportunity, and I'm about to call the question, and I was hoping you'd be back in the room for the vote. So I will call the question then on the motion with the amendments, with reference to the appendix as amended. All those in favor?
Trustee Boothby, Trustee Blackburn, Trustee Huff, Trustee Campbell, Trustee Ellis, Trustee Jenkins, Trustee Penny, Trustee Lyra, Trustee Bronovan, Trustee Schwartz, Trustee Scott.
And
Anyone on the line?
anybody on the phone? I think Trustee Fisher left the conference.
Thank you for
So
waiting.
although anyone opposed and abstentions, and that is carried, 11 in favor, and that's all of those present. So that is bringing us to the next item on our agenda, which is Report 19-056, Appointments to the Ontario Public School Boards Association for the 7th of July 2019 to July 2020. Madam Director.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair, I would like to ask Executive Officer Giroux to bring us through this report.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The report is on page 93 of your package. Annually, the board makes its appointments to the Ontario Public School Boards Association for the upcoming year, and the period of appointment is the 7th of July 2019 to the 7th of July 2020, and that coincides with the timing of the OPSPA general meetings. The recommendation is on page 95. 2 trustees must be appointed. For the past several years, it's been our practice that the 2 individuals who are appointed are also the voting and alternate delegates. And then 2 other trustees are appointed as alternate directors to the OPSPA Board of Directors. And so you may open the floor for nominations, and if there are more nominees than there are positions, we have ballots available, and if there are the same number of nominees as positions, then no ballot will be required.
Excuse me, Chair. I don't think we've moved back into board.
I agree with you on that. Would you like to move that we return to board rules?
Move that we return to board.
And do we? And since we were in committee, we didn't need a seconder for that. So I'll call the question. All those in favor? And opposed? And just in terms of what we did in committee, we did approve the recommendation that had been non-consent with regard to the response to the province on class size and hiring practices. And I think we don't need to do anything else with that.
You did have a motion.
And we voted
in
on
the rules
it
of committee, yeah.
And did we did it as a recorded vote too?
Right. That's fine.
So we're okay. So this means with regard to the OPSPA appointments, first, the floor is open for nominations for the position of director for OPSPA for the coming year, and I have Trustee Blackburn and then Trustee Penny. Trustee Blackburn.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and through you, I'd like to nominate Trustee Penny and Trustee Boothby.
One at a time, please. So just nominating Trustee Penny first.
I'll go with
And we need a
Trustee. I'll
second.
go in alphabetical order. I'll nominate Trustee Boothby.
Okay, and we need a seconder for that nomination. Trustee Bronovan. Trustee Boothby, do you accept a nomination as OPSPA Director?
Yes, thank you.
And back to you again, Trustee Blackburn.
The one now? Oh, then I'll nominate Trustee Penny.
And you can nominate Trustee Penny. And do we have a seconder for that nomination? Trustee Huff. And do you accept the nomination, Trustee Penny?
I do, Madam Chair.
And Trustee Ellis.
I'd like to move closed nominations.
And do we have a seconder for a motion to close nominations? Trustee Schwartz. And all those in favor of closing nominations? And opposed? And that motion is carried, which means that Trustees Boothby and Penny are acclaimed as directors for the OPSPA Board of Directors on behalf of the OCDSB. Do we need a motion to confirm that or not? And then we'll, okay. So the next one we're looking for is nominations to the position of alternate. Trustee Penny?
I would like to nominate Trustee Jenkins.
And is there a seconder for that nomination? Trustee Blackburn? And do you accept the nomination, Trustee Jenkins?
I accept.
Thank you. Are there further nominations? Trustee Boothby?
Thank you. I'd like to nominate Trustee Bronovan.
And is there a seconder for that one? Trustee Penny and Trustee Bronovan, do you accept the nomination?
I do not, with thanks to my nominator.
And so that one, Trustee Huff.
Trustee Blackburn.
And is there a seconder for that one? Trustee Penny, do you accept the nomination, Trustee
I do,
Blackburn?
Madam Chair.
And I see your hand inching up here in the corner. Trustee Ellis?
I'd like to put my name forward for the alternate, please.
Is self-nominating. Do we have a seconder for Trustee Ellis? Trustee Lyra? And I don't think I have to ask if you would accept the nomination. Are there any further nominations for the alternate position? If there are none, I think we need a motion to close nominations. Trustee Boothby, seconded by Trustee Schwartz. All those in favor of closing nominations? And it looks as though we are going to be having an election this evening. Do we have scrutineers, Madam Director?
Yes, Executive Officer and Superintendent McCoy will assist us with that.
Thank you. So the ballots will be distributed. You will be marking 2 names. The list is on the screen. Trustees Blackburn, Ellis, and Jenkins. And staff will be collecting your ballots and counting them. But we need 2 alternates. So we do have a result here, and I'm pleased to inform you that trustees Blackburn and Jenkins have been elected. So that means we now need a motion to confirm the recommendation that's on folio 95, inserting the names of the trustees who've been chosen. Trustees Boothby and Penny in Part A, trustees Blackburn and Jenkins in Part B. Trustee Schwartz, you're moving, and we need a seconder for that. Trustee Lyra, thank you. I'll call a question on the recommendation. Is this a recorded vote? I believe it is. So on a recorded vote, all those in favor?
Trustee Boothby, Trustee Blackburn, Trustee Huff, Trustee Campbell, Trustee Ellis, Trustee Jenkins, Trustee Penny, Trustee Lyra, Trustee Bronovan, Trustee Scott,
And that, abstentions? Trustee Schwartz,
Trustee Schwartz.
are you abstaining? You're voting in favor, thank you. And so that is unanimous then of those present. Carried 11 in favor. Now, next up, we have a matter for discussion, which has come to board tonight primarily because our June agendas are very crowded. And so this is report 19-065, Eastern Area Accommodation Review, monitoring impact on student achievement and well-being. Madam Director.
Thank you, and through you, Madam Chair, I'll invite Executive Officer Michelle Giroux and Superintendent Mary Jane Farish to lead us in this discussion. They'll introduce staff who are also joining the presentation.
Thank you very much. We're very pleased to be here. Myself, Superintendent Farish, Manager Oracheski, Principal Jen Perry, and not with us tonight, but the person who did a large part of the work behind this is our Research Officer, Catherine Magner. So our acknowledgement for her work. This report arises out of a board motion to do some in-depth monitoring on the impact of transition decisions with respect to the closure of Rideau High School and the relocation of those students to Gloucester High School. We are in the second year of a 3-year motion and brought a report to the board last year and have a report for you this year. We have a combination of both quantitative data and a presentation and some qualitative reflections from students and from the staff at the school, and we're going to quickly run through those. So just a few reflections to start. We started out this process thinking about the report we brought you last year, what it looked like, and how to stay true to that, and what data was available this year that might be different or might inform our thinking. We also spent some time thinking about what were our goals in this report, what was requested at the time, and what was the nature of the discussion, both by the committee and by the public. What concerns did we hear? And I think the goals of the accommodation review are outlined in the report. More equitable access to program offerings, greater consistency in school size, enrich program offerings wherever possible, enhance capacity to deliver special education, the geographic model, improved alignment with the secondary school program framework, and the optimization of resources. And hopefully in tonight's presentation we'll touch on most of those issues and where we've made progress with respect to that. And also are mindful of the concerns we heard from the community at the time, concerns about what impact this might have on enrollment, what impact it might have on market share, what impact it would have on students in terms of transition times, participation in extracurricular activities, their ability to find part-time work after school, the loss of potentially funding that was specific to one school site and not the other, the loss at the time of the lodge that was at Rideau High School. So those were some of the issues that came up in the community at the time, and I think in the course of our presentation tonight, we'll try and make sure those issues are addressed. We're going to work on the assumption that you've read through the report. It's data heavy, and Manager Orchesky will get into some of that in more detail, but we're going to start with some student reflections and school reflections, and I invite Principal Jen Perry to sort of walk us through some thoughts from the students and from the staff of the school.
Thank you. So the video gives a 3-minute snippet of life at Gloucester High School and highlights some of learning experiences, classroom activities, as well as school activities. And then also highlights student voice, specifically looking at some feedback for the district moving forward, including some possible feedback if the district were to look at, or the board were to look at merging other schools in the future. Thank you.
So we have many more academic choices now that Rideau is here at Gloucester, like for example, dance and human development, which are 2 courses that I'm currently taking now that we would have never had if they had not come over. And we also have just many more like extracurriculars that we also would have never had.
So with the transition, I have participated in many clubs and a lot of sports teams such as Link Crew, A-Team, Black Youth Diversity Group, and also band. And I've also, for the sports, I've also done the senior boys basketball team and also rugby. And because of that, and because of the transition, there have been many more people doing basketball, more people doing rugby, and there's been a lot better advancements in the programs I've been in, I guess.
So as an ex-Rideau student, one of the main things I wanted to point out that there was some great support that was offered between Gloucester and Rideau for the transition period. One thing I'd definitely like to kind of enforce for the future is to make either the decision a lot sooner, so there's a lot more ease and a lot more transition, either with trips coming down to the different schools, or by making those more supports for both the students entering and they're already at Gloucester to help to make the transition just that much easier.
Thank you. So as you can see, that just gives you a very, very quick snippet of our school. But I can tell you our school is absolutely amazing. And every day when I walk in the building, it is just an incredible feeling. And to walk into classrooms and to talk to students in the halls or outside, they are amazing. I am just so very, very appreciative of everything they do and who they are. So I think it's quite evident, and from what the students were saying, and you're only seeing a very small snippet, but the opportunities for academic excellence and for honoring all pathways in the merger of the two schools has really been outstanding. We can offer so many incredible, rich courses and programs for students where they are inspired and they have more opportunities to learn about themselves and the world is really wonderful. We have four schisms and many courses in all pathways, as I mentioned. The students also talked about extracurricular. So we have over 75 clubs and teams, and we are always adding more based on student voice. And if they approach us and ask us or say they would be interested in something else, so we do everything we can to ensure that. I have to say that I'm so proud of all of our students together in terms of their student leadership and their voice. And over the past 2 years, it has been absolutely incredible to see them grow and mature. You saw pictures of the powwow, you saw pictures which was community and student-led. You saw pictures of our Indigenous Youth Assembly, of our Black History group. We have a student who is going on full scholarship to Students on Ice in the North this year. We have students who participate in civics and careers on DELA projects, which have been remarkable. Some of our Indigenous students work with Ingenium and their in STEM class to give feedback about how we can make the museums in Ottawa better and to showcase and highlight Indigenous contributions in a better way. They have access to all kinds of additional community supports. So for example, we have a nurse practitioner because of the urban priority funding, which we also will have next year, so that has been really helpful. We do all kinds of community partnerships. We have the Soup and Share, which trustees at this table have participated in and helped in, and Trustee Ellis, you have been a huge supporter of that and was at our school making soup with one of our parent chefs this year, and that was very, very much appreciated. The board has also given additional supports for our students in terms of academics, but also in terms of transportation. So one of the things that came up 2 years ago was equity of access, and it was a result of the discussion at this table that students from Rideau were granted Presto passes. And that has been huge for our students, and the concerns that maybe the distance, you know, in the past being able to walk across the street to school, and now they have to go further, has not really been an issue because that Presto Pass has really provided them other opportunities and access to other things. We also have homework club every night of the week that continuing ed provides, and Boys and Girls Club that comes in twice a week, actually 3 times a week, because they come in on Fridays at lunch as well. So that has been amazing, and I could go on, but I would invite anyone that is interested or any of the new trustees to the district, if you really want to understand and feel the school, we would love to host you at the school, and you can spend an hour or half an hour, whatever you're able, but when you walk in that foyer and you walk into classrooms, you'll really see what a magical and incredible place it truly is. And we are just getting better and better and better, so it's going to be awesome next year too. Thank you.
So I'm going to keep my comments and observations really brief. I wanted to first start off, though, oftentimes when we're in the central office, using administrative systems to get data, we don't always have an opportunity to get the context from the school. So the opportunity to work on this and be able to meet with Principal Perry over the course of the development of this report and to verify and confirm the numbers just increases our confidence, I guess, in the information that we're presenting, and I think in tandem with the qualitative piece provides a really good picture. So in terms of the impact on student enrollment, some of the key observations that you'll note in the report, and certainly leading up to the accommodation review, both sites were experiencing a decline in enrollment leading up to the ARC and into the first couple of years of transition. But you will note from the information presented that there has been a decline in the rate of decline. So it's less than 1% this year. Looking at the boundaries where students are living, you can see that we're actually increasing in the proportion of students who are residing in the Rideau boundary, stable for Gloucester, and a slight decline in students that are living outside of either of those 2 school boundaries this past year. In terms of student mobility, we've tried to offset the new students with the attritions and the transfers. So historically, when we look at the 2 sites, we have between 1/4 and 1/3 of new students accounting for the overall enrollment at both sites. And in 2017, that pretty much stayed the same when we looked at the combined Gloucester enrollment. This past year, in 2018, October, we reached 34%. More than half of the new students are actually from the grade 9 cohort, and nearly 40% are coming from other countries. In terms of the attrition or transfers out of Gloucester, we saw withdrawals and rates of withdrawal historically being higher in the former Rideau High School than in Gloucester. 57 students withdrew from Gloucester, which represented less than 6% of their October 31st enrollment this past year. The number of Gloucester High School students not returning this year has decreased by almost 1/3. We've also added a new information to this year's report that wasn't available in last year's, looking at the transfer requests out of Gloucester, and those have historically been, since the amalgamation, requests to transfer out of Gloucester have historically been lower than for the combined schools the combined total for all schools. What's not on the PowerPoint but is in your report is looking at the actual specific longitudinal tracking of the individual students who had been at Rideau and who are now at Gloucester High School. So this year we only have students in grades 11 and 12. Next year it will be grade 12 only. And trends have been fairly consistent with what we saw last year. So we had 262 Rideau students who were enrolled at Gloucester at the end of June. And when we looked at the enrollments at the end of October, we noted that 86 former Rideau students had graduated, 24 students were not enrolled at Gloucester, but the majority had transferred to another educational institution, and 152 remained at Gloucester for the current year. In the student video, a couple of students, I think, alluded to the fact that there were more opportunities available to them. In your report, you'll find a detailed table on folios 106 and 107 that show the unique course offerings available to students. And generally speaking, students in the former Rideau boundary had greater access to applied courses, academic courses, university courses, and classical studies and international languages, whereas students in the former Gloucester boundary had greater access to locally developed and essentials courses, workplace courses, and ESL and ELD courses. Students from both schools have mutually benefited from an overall increase in open college and college university level courses. In terms of impact on student achievement, well-being, we looked at the QAO OSSLT results, and those would be from last year's administration. That information would be for the cohort of students who would have been in grade 9 at the former Rideau and Gloucester high schools. And when we look at the combined total, we see that there was a modest decline of 3 percentage points, and that's in comparison to 2% in terms of the overall success rates. And in terms of grade 10 credit accumulation, there was a 2% decline over the same period, and that's 16 credits by the end of grade 10. In terms of well-being, we don't currently, we're working on the district level analysis of the Our Schools data for this year, which hopefully will be available in the coming weeks to be sharing with you. So the only information that we have is from the parent survey last year. And when we look at things like school inclusivity, welcoming environment, supports for learning, and perceptions about supports for positive behavior and school safety, parent ratings for Gloucester High School, the combined, or the amalgamated school, have increased over the ratings from the previous administration when the two schools were separate. And at this, I will turn things over to Superintendent Farish.
Thank you very much. So our next slide focuses on the next steps, and I invite you to look at page 123 or folio 123 of your board package if you wish to follow along. I am just going to highlight a few of the next steps. Gloucester is very committed to looking at how to improve and increase parent, guardian, caregiver engagement, continuing to focus on the access to authentic engagement and involvement from community and families. They're also going to continue to commit to providing a range of learning opportunities and spaces and encourage students to continue to express their voice and to expand the leadership opportunities. As you heard Principal Perry mention in her reflections, that she is committed to expanding the leadership opportunities and experiences for all students. Gloucester is also looking to expand professional learning teams and the work that they're doing collaboratively with students to foster a sense of community, to further foster the sense of community. And as well, looking forward to the well-being data that will come, that we have started to receive, and be looking at analyzing that data from the Our Schools student survey that was just completed. And most of all, as Principal Perry says, her commitment to continue to invite and welcome guests and visitors into the school, to be in the spaces and places where Gloucester community is learning and taking care of one another together. And so I would also echo Principal Perry's sentiments that you will definitely feel the experience of the success that has been achieved by the students and staff and community in that building. Our last slide for you this evening is just to help focus some guiding questions and to invite your feedback and questions as well. These are the 3 questions that you see at the end of the report. And so with that, we can close our formal presentation.
Thank you very much for a very rich report. I do have a speakers list, beginning with Trustee Blackburn. I remind everybody that at the moment we are in board, and if we want to have a committee-style discussion, we will have to have another motion to move to committee. And I've just added you to our list, Trustee Lara. So Trustee Blackburn. If we're in committee, it's 3 minutes. If we're in board, it's 5, but only speak once.
Give me 5. I'll go with 5 for now.
Well, we're still in board at the moment, so you have
5. Thank you, Madam Chair, through you, and I'd like to thank all the staff that are here today. I've had the pleasure and honor of visiting Gloucester High several times since the consolidation. I'd like to thank Principal Perry for her hospitality, and on many of those occasions, Trustee Schwartz has joined me, or I've joined her. Thank you for that. And I was very proud when the recent OPSPA regional meeting was held there, and it was the Eastern trustees, and including the president of OPSPA came down and joined us, and I invited Senator Kim Pate to join us, and we smudged, and because I felt, as Senator Pate is somebody I've known for a long time, but she was one of the people who spoke out against this consolidation, and I wanted her to see it for herself, what it was all about. And she spoke to a civics class, and we smudged and such. It was wonderful. And I think we as a board need to come to a point where we have unanimous consensus that this consolidation was a complete success. This is crucial. And put the difficult things that all of us went through aside and say we made the right decision for these students and for these families, and we've given them more opportunities than they had. I was also at the Black Youth Forum, and I was so uplifted because one of the student presentations was a dance troupe from Gloucester, and the students spoke about that. That wouldn't have happened 3 years ago. And it's happening now. I was at an event in my community, and I happened to be sitting. I didn't know him. He started talking to me. He recognized who I was. Happened to be the music teacher at Gloucester. Thrilled. He just got so much to do now. He's so excited. So I'll stop talking about this success because I could go on and use my 5 minutes, but I can't do that because I have some questions. So I know our motion says that this is to go on for another year. I would like to know from the executive officer, how long did this report take to produce, and how many people, I noticed you mentioned somebody who's not present, but were there any more people involved in that?
The development of the report and the video involves obviously the school staff, staff in the research department, staff in business and learning technologies to pull the data, some planning staff to interpret the data, and the senior staff team. I can't comment on the hours of work by all of those individuals. I can tell you that the research officer plays a coordinating role, and we estimate that to be 100 to 140 hours of work, so 3 to 4 weeks of work on this one report. Keeping in mind that what is particularly complicated about this report is having to disaggregate the data based on former boundaries, and that information is not readily or easily done, and so that is a significant piece of it.
Thank you, Executive Officer. And so to my colleagues, I would ask you to ponder, do we need to produce this report again next year? Because one of the arguments that was given was that the students from Rideau would not go to Gloucester. That has not come to fruition. They in fact did go to Gloucester. And I don't know that we need to keep analyzing this to death. And what I also want to know from the principal is, what impact is this continued focus on Gloucester and the amalgamation having on students? Because at the end of the day, this shouldn't be about us and what data we want rather than what data we need, because I'm not sure what we're going to do with this data, right? And if we collect it again and produce this report again that costs 140 hours of staff time, for what purpose? What are we going to do with it? What are we doing with it tonight, other than going to say Gloucester's a success? So I want to know, what impact is this microscope having on the students and their families? Because we didn't do it to Century. Nobody's talking about what's going on at Carleton Heights.
Well, I can't speak for all of the students, but some of the students are surprised that we are going back and asking them questions along those lines. They are certainly, I guess, happy to give some feedback and suggestions for if this is were to happen with 2 other schools in the future, or other schools in the future. And our students are always actually very happy to help. But it did maybe take them a little bit by surprise, or that we're one school now, and why are we going there? Although they gave us feedback.
And I just have one more, and then I'm not even going to use up my 5 minutes. In the same vein, okay, so I hear what you say about the students, and I heard Executive Officer Giroux talk about the staff, some involvement with the staff in putting this together. But in general, do the staff have feelings or thoughts about this process, and one way or the other, or?
In terms of compiling the report?
Well, besides Principal Perry, I suspect there are other people at Gloucester who are involved in this, or is it just the
Sorry. Our staff together is incredible. It is such a richer staff, and we are learning more collaboratively together. At the beginning of last year, it was a little bit harder because we were under massive reconstruction, and we had 2 departments that didn't have offices or workspaces, but they still managed. But we have all those spaces now, and you could see in the video that we have incredible classrooms. And so the professional development and the collaboration is really strong and getting stronger. And they are really keen to work together. So yeah, we're one.
Thank you for that. And no, and I can relate to the construction challenges that you may have had, because we had those at Maryville and we had them at Sir Robert Borden, and I suspect they have them at Bell or wherever else we made significant changes. So the construction issues aren't unique to Gloucester High School. And I'll conclude there, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Blackburn. Next on my list, I have Trustee Ellis.
Thank you. I'd like to propose moving into Committee of the Whole rules.
And do we have a seconder for that? Trustee Bronovan. All those in favor of moving to committee rules? And opposed? And the motion is carried. Trustee Ellis, go ahead, please.
Thank you. I wasn't going to go here, but I will outline some of my thinking, because I proposed this motion to track. The reason I brought it forward was so the board can learn. And I think we've learned some valuable lessons, and there's still lessons to be learned. Also brought it forward, and you know, other trustees could have suggested the same thing for schools in their zones that were affected. You know, I don't think, because no one else did, that this would disqualify this one. But as well, there were a number of assertions made to the communities, both Rideau and Gloucester. You know, this isn't just Rideau, because it affected Gloucester, and I was, you know, I want to make sure that in this opportunity we take this opportunity to learn what we can regarding such a disruption in our schools. And it's somewhat selfish, because the next, if we ever get back to accommodations, will be in another area that in my zone. So the intent was to as well show to the communities that what they were told is actually happening. And that's an important thing for trust. And if we don't do that, there's always that lingering thinking in the community that, gee, you know, I hear this story. You hear one story and it can turn, you know, if it's negative, that can overrun 10 others. So that's the reason why I thought it was important to do this tracking. Now, let's get critical, and only in, not I'm being mean or nasty. I'm not trying to do any catches. I just want to understand that. And the first thing I want to understand is to get a common understanding between staff and myself and my colleagues as to sort of the scope of this. And I bring your attention to page 108. I'll have to go quick. Under student achievement, you only did the grade 10 OSL because that was the students who were impacted by the transition. Now, when I brought this forward, and I may have used transition students, you know, part of that transition is new students coming in. So I guess clarification from staff, you know, we didn't look at the grade 90 QAO because because the students who were actually moving from Rideau to Gloucester didn't take it. But I was hoping that that we would see in the future how that disaggregated. And one of the issues is, as has been pointed out, okay. Anyways,
Please,
I'll go back on the list.
Please finish that thought. I'm quite prepared to be flexible on time, so you get the whole thing out here.
There was a significant difference between the success rate at Gloucester to Rideau, and one of the assertions that was made that I'd like to prove to be true was that in combining, and I don't expect it the first year, but in combining the two, that there would be better student outcomes, which is why I'd like that disaggregated. I'd like to be able to show my community, that the Rideau community, that look at the Rideau students, you know, it had been under Rideau this synergy has raised that up. So that's why I'm hoping in the future we could see that, just to, anyways, comment on staff on whether that might be something to look at in the future.
Any comment from staff? Go ahead.
Through you, Madam Chair, we had, when we originally brought forward the plan, we had envisioned including the grade 9 and had indicated we would disaggregate by boundary where feasible. As we undertook the work this year, we had several questions around why we would be looking at grade 9 because those students wouldn't have experienced any other learning environment but the one that they experienced at Gloucester this year. In terms of the disaggregation by boundary, when we explored that option, comparability from year to year, if you were to be looking at the school level, the former Gloucester and Rideau, would have been confounded because we may have had some, like in the reports that we get from the Education Quality Accountability Office, reports on the results for the school as a whole. So in order to provide comparability, it would have required significant amount of staff time to go back the 5 years to disaggregate all of those measures by former boundary. And then we were wondering about what the meaning of that interpretation would be because we are looking at the student's place of residence in relation to their EQAO results. So in terms of the meaningfulness and balancing that against the amount of work involved, that's where the decision was made not to include that level of detail.
Thank you very much for that explanation. Trustee Ellis, do you want to be back on the list? Very good. Next up, I have Trustee Schwartz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. First off, I just want to thank the staff for putting together this report, and particularly to Principal Perry and to Superintendent Farish. I think a lot of the work that shows up in this and the positive tone that we see in the report is largely a result of the leadership that's shown by the administration at the school. And I'm thrilled that we get to keep you for another year at Gloucester, just as the transition isn't completed. And I think, you know, we've acknowledged that most of it is, but there's still some issues related to construction and just a few little things like that still too. So, you know, I think, I'm a very proud trustee of having Gloucester as part of my portfolio, and Colonel By as well. And when I get calls from parents, you know, who say, oh my gosh, you know, Sandra, what do you think about Gloucester? You know, Colonel By's got such a great reputation. I say, go meet with the staff at Gloucester, go spend time in the school, and trust me, it's a school you'll want your kids in. So an example of that is when a colleague of mine moved to Ottawa, and she was looking at a school for her kids. They're Indigenous, they came from Alberta, they'd had a terrible experience out in Alberta and in British Columbia with their one daughter. And I said, go meet with Principal Perry, go check out the school. They decided to move into the catchment so that their daughter could graduate from Gloucester. And again, I can tell you firsthand experience, I get calls from the daughter, not just hearing from her mom at work, but I get calls from the daughter specifically to say what a great experience Gloucester has been for her. Where she feels welcomed, she feels included, she feels like it's been a community that has completely embraced her. And I tell that story because I think it's important that as we look at these kinds of transitions, and one of the questions here is about future transitions and amalgamations, is it's talking about creating that culture of inclusivity. Right from the start and from the top of this table down through the administration, the teachers, and the students themselves. And I think the students have embodied what is so great about this school, but the students themselves, when you talk to them about their experiences, and I've spent a lot of time talking to the kids, when the one connecting piece is no one felt that the two cultures had to be against each other. They felt that they could be together and that they could take the great things of both schools and create something new. And I think this report demonstrates a lot of those great things that we should look to in future amalgamations, in setting up a lot of the same sort of structures, the school councils, so the students themselves and how they came together over the summer to talk about how that transition would go come September. It's those kinds of pieces that this report actually is quite important to show and demonstrate those pieces. Do we need another year? I'm not sure, but certainly the 2 years I think have shown us some really great results, and there's some really telling pieces in the data as well. So thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Schwartz. Next, I have Trustee Campbell.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you for the presentation. I have to say the report is generally positive, and I very much appreciate that. If I'm correct, there may be some wobbles. I think maybe in EQAO, I believe it may not be perhaps exactly maybe where we want to see it, if I understand the presentation. But generally, I have to say it seems to me that this is a positive thing. Through you, Madam Chair, can I inquire, the Presto Pass provision, is that permanent or does that also expire after 2 years?
Through you, Madam Chair, I had the motion pulled up to double check that fact, and it wasn't time sensitive. Principal Perry and I had a very quick side conversation about the fact that for a lot of the students, they would meet the distance requirement in any case. So probably is ongoing, but there was no time limit posed on that in the motion.
Thank you. I mean, this is going to sound awful, but I would like a third year of reporting, perhaps not as extensively. Much as I appreciate the qualitative angle, I'm not really a qualitative data guy. I really like the quantitative, so maybe we don't have to bother the students. I don't know. But in any event, I do see some usefulness perhaps in that third year. We are going to get the well-being information coming forward. And as well, sounds awful, but 3 FTE supports will drop off, right? That have been especially allocated. And it'll be interesting to me to see if that produces a wobble or a difference or not. And I think that it's important to see if we can, in fact, extraordinarily resource and then draw down, and things are okay. I mean, I mean, this is sort of part of the lessons learned from me. As I say, I mean, if I was cruel and wanted, good experimentation, I'd remove the Presto passes as well. But it's I think important to perhaps have that third year and perhaps concentrate on in terms of some of the indicators we're concerned about, suspensions, EQAO, what have you. Perhaps in a quantitative way, maybe that would make for less staff work. Staff are extremely good, in my experience, at always making sure that school communities come together very successfully. And I look forward to that occurring when Putnam closes later, is it this month? Next month. In my experience at the superintendency level, the administration level, and throughout staff, and then of course student and community, there are months of planning, and people make these things happen reliably, and it's always a good news story. And sort of once again, kudos to staff and all involved. Sort of hit the mark. Absolutely, it's fairly clear. The key to me was student retention, but also matters such as EQAO and achievement. And I am concerned about the removal, what impact the removal of these extra resources, which the board voted to make this work, might have. And so we'll see. Maybe it won't make a difference when they're removed, maybe they were never needed. I don't know. But it'll be interesting to see what happens when that occurs. The success of the amalgamation, of course, in my mind at least, is a separate question from strategic purpose with respect to removing high-need schools from high-need areas, but that's a separate discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Campbell. Trustee Lyra.
So I wasn't a member of this board when the decision to close Rideau happened, and while I might not agree with the decision, I understand that we cannot change the past. I do have some questions about the report. It says on folio 125 that 60 students who were not enrolled, or who were enrolled at Rideau, who did not graduate, did not enroll at Gloucester. 105? 105? My apologies. So that looks to me like 19% of students didn't graduate. Can I get a comment on whether or not that is accurate? Or sorry, didn't transfer to Gloucester. Can I get a comment on whether or not that's accurate?
Sorry, through you, Madam Chair, can you repeat? So I just went to folio 105, so...
Folio 105, it says, of the 399 students enrolled at Rideau High School at the end of June 2017, 60 students not enrolled at were not enrolled at Gloucester. Do we know where those 60 students went? Because I heard around the discussion that all the students transferred, and that looks like almost 20% of students didn't go to Gloucester, and I'm sort of wondering, do we know what happened to them?
So through you, Madam Chair, yes, in the appendix, we did provide some additional information. It might have actually, we consolidated this year's report, so if it doesn't, sorry, so yes. If you look, we actually had 57 students not enrolled at Gloucester last year, the majority of whom transferred to another educational institution. There were 7 students, sorry, we're on folio 127. There were 7 students that moved outside of Ontario, so they may have also continued in education, but we're limited to the exit codes that are in our student information system. So it shows the destination of those students there.
Can I ask why the numbers are different? Why is it 60 in one place and not 60 in the other?
Right, and I'd have to go back to last year's report. We had a footnote for that where the numbers didn't quite jive, so I can follow up in a follow-up communication to trustees with that.
Okay, thank you. My next question is relates to footnote 5 about how a number of students who were grade 9 students at Rideau became grade 11 or 12 students when they transferred to Gloucester. I'm wondering what special ELL supports existed at Rideau that had them held at grade 9, or what kept them at grade 9. When they were transferred, why did their grade level change?
Through you, Madam Chair, sometimes when students are newly arrived to the country, the coding in which they are assigned in Trillium is reflective of either their birth date or a grade 9 entry, but after they've been in the school system for a period of time, their grading changes because of where they are in terms of their academic achievement and advancement, prior learning credits, and so forth.
Okay, thank you. Probably my last question. On page 113, you talk about supports that existed, and I'm wondering, seeing as there is still a group of students who have been impacted by this transition, why the full-time employees are being removed, but the additional urban funding is not?
The board motion directed the time period for the allocation of additional resources. The funding is a separate issue from the ministry. We don't control that. We just did work to make sure that it transferred from one school to the other.
Do we know when the funding from the ministry is going to continue until?
Hopefully it will continue, but we don't know the answer to that.
All right, thank you so much.
And next, as a first-time speaker, I have Trustee Boothby.
Thank you, and thank you for this report. Most of my questions and comments have already been asked. I really appreciate this report and the level of detail, and it certainly does look like both communities have really become one community, and I'm really happy to see that. I was also at the OCDSB regional meeting where we had an opportunity to visit with the lodge and visit the school, and I was really impressed with what I saw there. So I think that this has been a real wonderful thing for the students at both of the schools. I do think we need to continue on for the third year, especially when we know that we are going to have to change things a little bit. I think this is really good information for us as a board to understand if we do a transition similar to this, that we know what kinds of things to expect, and maybe we find out in a year that we need to put some of these supports back in. I'm very concerned that we keep the Presto Pass going. That to me was one of the huge compromises for this, because it's a good thing to have all these extracurriculars, but if kids can't take part of those because they're being bussed out at 3:15 or whatever the bell time is, then they've lost a significant amount of those extracurricular club activities and just also peer interaction, which I think has probably made a big difference in really building a community around this, because if certain kids are having to leave while other kids can stay and partake, that I could see in the future becoming an us vice them. In terms of questions, I note on page 119 several bullets down on what was done to address the challenges. There's a bullet here that says we continue to attempt to keep certain staff with specific classes. So I'm wondering what are our challenges with that, and what we can do to help with that.
That was, thank you, Trustee Boothby, that was specifically with ELD, LD, and the DDP programs, and the ELD is a larger cohort within our school. So we have, even going into next year, been able to ensure that we have very similar staffing. The ELD program was new to Gloucester. It had been at Rideau, but not at Gloucester. So we wanted to make sure that we had consistent staffing. So that hasn't been an issue, and it's worked within the LD program as well.
Okay, excellent. Thank you for that. And my final question would be, again, with respect to things like the extracurriculars and including school council for parents, can you just describe, if you know, what kind of uptake there has been from the Rideau community? Has it been fully embraced? Is it a pretty good mix, or are we still finding that we need to have a little bit more engagement on that front?
I would say it is a good mix. I haven't, to be honest, collected specific data for every club and team, but anecdotally, it is a good mix.
And what about school council? Are we seeing parents from the Rideau community also attending?
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Boothby. And I have two second-time speakers on this, Trustee Blackburn and then Trustee Ellis.
Thank you, Madam Chair, through you. I find it interesting that people who were against the decision to close Rideau were all too happy to attend
Blackburn,
Yeah.
I would advise you to refrain from raking up past history on this, in the sense of the disagreements at the board table.
But somebody else just did.
There's no need to continue it. Thank you.
Oh, okay. So I'm being treated differently than somebody else. That's not abnormal. Okay. I do find it problematic, though, that the board would consider one test score over a 2-year period to adjudicate whether or not this was a success. And when I talk about student outcomes, for me personally, student outcome is a lot more encompassing than an EQAO score. So it is things like well-being, which is much harder to measure. It's hard to measure the impact of extracurriculars on mood, on attendance, and all these things. I mean, attendance isn't even something we're necessarily looking at. But again, I would ask my colleagues to dig deep and think about why we would need staff to go through this again. And now that they've gone through it, what are we actually doing with it? We're talking about it, which is fine and dandy, but is it going to impact the fact that we've had this discussion, or the fact that the report has been produced, is it going to impact the education of a student? I'm not sure. The other question I have is the extra funding you get, that's the urban priorities fund.
What was the question about the urban priorities?
So Rideau right now is getting urban priorities funding.
Gloucester.
Gloucester. And what other high schools in our district are getting that?
Ridgemont.
Okay. Assume if it comes to fruition that we lose that both high schools would lose that funding.
I refer to the associate director, who's probably better able to answer than I am.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Chair. The funding is approved by the province on an annual basis. If Ridgemont, what's the question? Should Ridgemont change? What would be the impact on the funding?
Well, I guess because we're talking about the potential that Gloucester might lose that funding, but Gloucester wouldn't be the only high school that loses that funding that would be impacted, right? So if we lost it, and then it would affect something may or may not be affected, but we wouldn't be looking at Ridgemont because we're not looking at Ridgemont. But I'm just saying it's not just Gloucester that could be impacted by the loss of that funding, and we don't know, right, as of yet, if they're getting it?
We have it for this coming school year. The province has a list of criteria.
So for the purposes of the next report, if we continue with this motion, that they're getting it. Okay, very good. All right, thank you.
And Trustee Ellis.
I'm going to go way back to when I finished. We were talking about the grade 9. One of the concerns in the community and for myself was that when you roll Rideau in with Gloucester, we're then looking at averages. And what were some of the challenges for the Rideau community, and it was, the EQAO rates were not what I would like to have seen for Rideau. It's not walking into, you can't look at a high school in isolation. So the reason I wanted to segregate it was so that we could see if we were doing our own grade 9. But so this is why I'd like to have the grade 9 to see that disaggregated. And then when we come to grade 10 for the new students coming in, we can see, are they does there seem to be movement upward on these metrics for these disaggregated groups? So that's why I would like to see, and I guess maybe comment on it, because I feel that I didn't support my community well enough that the school was deemed to be and had higher scores that made it more attractive. My concern is that that doesn't replicate itself at Gloucester, that we move forward, that the Rideau community is doing better as well. And it may not be just Gloucester that we need to do it to, but to look at some of the feeder schools as well. So I guess a comment on how staff feel about my assertion around that.
I think I'll start, and the manager, I'm sure, will have lots to add. I think our concern is there are many things that affect how a cohort does on a particular assessment. And so you're looking at one assessment and getting that data for, as Manager Orchesky mentioned, for a cohort of students who will only have ever known that. As we go into next year, we'll only have one grade of students who ever were a part of Rideau, right? So as the students continue to move through. But the challenge is we have to disaggregate the data for more than 1 year. We have to go back. So the volume of work is quite significant, and I'm not sure that it tells us a fulsome story about how students are doing. We might, as a takeaway, have a conversation about credit accumulation or some other things that might be easier to disaggregate than EQAO data. But again, is it going to give us information that is interesting, or is it going to give us information that provides some clarity in terms of how we might proceed or make future decisions? And I think that's the difference in terms of resource allocation and information.
I can't help but think when we get the ASAR, we see EQAO results disaggregated by SES, which means identifying EQA results on a geographical manner, which maps census data to a geographical area, low-income area, and this is it. So I don't really see that as any different. You can inform me on that. But let's get to the cost, because it's a good thing I read this on Friday, because when I read about the resources being taken away from students to do this report, I was a little upset, because I'm thinking we closed the school, and perhaps, if you know off the top of the head, how many less teachers combined we needed, because that'll give a good metric of one of our biggest cost savings. And I'm thinking, we've saved a lot of money in doing this, and now we're penalizing these students again by taking direct. My anticipation would be that this would be done, the resources that were needed, especially at the school level, if a teacher was taken out, that there would be a replacement, that wouldn't be a loss of services. So I guess a comment on that.
I'm not certain. Manager Orchesky can explain the difference in terms of how we calculate it for SES, but I'm not sure I'm clear on the information being sought with respect to resources coming out of the classroom.
Could you clarify, Trustee Ellis?
Starts on folio 112 at the bottom, last sentence. Qualitative information for this report has been compiled by the school and also represents a significant workload on the part of staff, redirecting their time away from supporting student needs. Perhaps you could give me a ballpark figure of FTEs that were not available to students to do this report, or a dollar figure. And the other thing I asked was how many teachers, at Rideau and Gloucester, prior to the amalgamation, there was X number of teachers. When it was amalgamated, there was that number of teachers minus, there were less teachers at that combined. And so I'm wondering...
Trustee Ellis, perhaps it would be simplest just to ask if staff could clarify the meaning of that particular sentence in the report.
So in this particular case, we're really talking about the research time. The largest part of this report is the time for research staff. So we've got one research officer who's dedicated a fairly significant amount of time to undertake this particular project. So that resources in the research team haven't changed or weren't affected by the closure decision. So that's the same number of resources. So that individual, while working on this, is not looking at supporting the school superintendency, for example, in terms of that data support, or looking at other research projects or priorities. So, you know, it's taking 3 to 4 weeks of dedicated time that's not on some other report. I'm not saying that's a bad investment of time. The board directed it, and we've allocated that resource. But when we looked at the differentiation of that particular EQAO data and said, do we allocate an additional 15 to 30 hours or more on this particular measure, and would it inform our practice? We didn't think that that additional work was worth adding to here. If the board feels differently, that's certainly something that can be revisited. But I guess the question we asked is, how would it change our practice going forward?
And Trustee Ellis,
Back on the list,
I'm afraid you're
please.
out of time, but I'll put you back on the list. And I do have one more second-time speaker, Trustee Lyra.
So I don't think it's been explicitly stated, but I found this very useful to inform future thinking, because I suspect at some point in the future we might have to look at school closures. And I think having as much information as possible, and I'm actually going to later request the previous year's copies of this report, so that I will have the information that I think I need to be able to make decisions around school closures. And so I see the creation of these reports as incredibly valuable. And so I'm going to, if we end up voting on it, encourage people to create next year, so we have a complete set of the impacts of closing or merging Rideau and Gloucester.
Thank you, Trustee Lyra. Trustee Ellis.
Thank you. How many grade 10 geography classes in academic and separately in applied? How many sections were there in this year?
I would have to double check on that. I don't have that data in front of me right now in terms of the number of sections, but the number of sections are determined by the number of students that take that class or sign up for that class, and geography is a compulsory course.
I ask only because in the discussion, it was brought up many times that because of the low enrollment at Rideau, geography was only offered every second year. So I just want to, you know, that was one of the talking points that I want to confirm.
We offer geography every year. All of the compulsories are offered every year.
Glad to hear that.
Thank you, Trustee Ellis. Trustee Bronovan? Oh, I thought you turned your microphone off. I thought you were done.
Thank you. On Folio 105, just some clarifications. I'm trying to understand the numbers, and I'm hoping that we can spend some time together looking at some of these. In Table 4, in grade 12, we see that the numbers, if you go back the years, that the numbers for grade 12 is actually higher than one would think. Is that due to students staying for a fifth year?
That is correct. Trillium only goes up to grade 12, so any student who is there for fifth year would still be coded as grade 12.
Thank you. And I noticed in 2017, there were 86 students in grade 9, and then for grade 10, when they came to Gloucester, there were 18 down. That's part of the 60 students or so that's spoken of in the section just below that, at the bottom of that page.
Through you, yeah, we've displayed the information in that table in a couple of ways. In the table itself, we're looking at the actual specific grade number. So it doesn't actually follow the cohort. So for example, if you look at grade 9, in that first column, there were 86 students from the Rideau cohort. And if you track that through to the grade 10, in the next column, you've got 68. However, when you look below in the bubbly flow chart, and I know it's really small to see in the report, but that actually then breaks it out, so you longitudinally track. So those 86 grade 9 students, 67 of them were coded as grade 10 the following year, 6 were coded as grade 11, 1 was coded as grade 12, and 12 were non-returning. So it just, there again, speaks to Trustee Lyra's comments around you don't always necessarily have the true progression. Some of it's coding within Trillium or changes in terms of definitions of how grades are to be coded over time.
Thank you. Folio 101, the total enrollment by school, by school as of October 31st. It's easy because prior to 2017, they were separate schools, so it was easy to get the numbers. You haven't done that disaggregation there, but you've given the total enrollment on the figure 1 below, the total enrollment. If one were to take the percentages and plug them into the numbers, one would be able to get the hard numbers for 2017 and 2018.
Yeah, working with the percentages isn't always, because that speaks to the boundary and not necessarily the school. We did look at information in multiple ways. I can go back and see if we are able to disaggregate. We wouldn't be able to disaggregate the total enrollment by it. We can only do it by their former boundary, because we wouldn't know necessarily whether or not those students would have gone to Rideau or to Gloucester. So that's why we haven't extended the Gloucester and Rideau enrollments in that Table 1 breakdown.
We can talk about that offline. What was I going to ask? So for new enrollments on page 103, figure 2, so these are the percentages of new students coming in. I'd sort of like to explore,
Is it a very long sentence, Trustee Ellis?
we're starting to get into some number stuff, and I'd rather perhaps meet with staff outside of this venue. It's more just so that I understand it. One last question, my final one, if I may.
In that case, please go ahead.
I just want to be clear on how the years are. Usually we go 2017, 18, so that we know which it is. So when we look at 2014, 2015, is that 2014-15 year, or?
So yes, this particular graph on Folio 103 is based on October 31st enrollment.
Sorry, I'm referring to Table 1, and all of the tables are similar for the years.
Yes, and we recognize that there's not entire consistency throughout the report, and some of that is addressed in the couple of pages of limitations. Some of them are snapshot points in time based on October 31st enrollment. Some are looking at transitions from the end of one school year into the next school year. So certainly if when we are preparing these reports, we will try and be more mindful and provide greater clarity there.
So for Table 1, that would be snapshot in time data, right? And it would be based on October 31st of that school year. So you can read that 2014 as the date at October 31st for the 2014-15 school year, and forward.
And if I may, just to thank you for the report. I think it's very valuable. It certainly shows that the students are doing well, that we as a board have worked very diligently in melding those two. There are still some lingering concerns I have around community, not high school. You know, it wasn't just Rideau, it's a community that had to make a change. So that's what I'm hoping to see, some information that'll help us make decisions around that. Thank you.
Thank you, Trustee Ellis. Trustee Bronovan, would you please take the chair for a moment?
By all means.
I did have a couple of, well, one question and a couple of comments. And I guess my question is, in terms of the data and the information that's in this report, from a staff perspective of looking at school improvement and future need to potentially consolidate schools, what would staff see as the most meaningful pieces of the data in this report?
A challenging question. I'll start while others have a chance to reflect on what they might say. I think that we have to think about that in the context of the 2 years of reporting. And if we think about what the goals were going into the decision, we talked about enriched program offerings for students, and the data has shown that we've been able to do that. And we talked about more equitable access both to program offerings and to quality instruction. And one of the things that really struck me on a tour of Gloucester High School after or in the middle of the renovations last year were the changes to the science labs and the actual infrastructure changes, the investments we were able to make in the buildings. And so if we think about that, we had a secondary school in the national capital that had science labs that didn't have gas, and the students weren't able to perform experiments in the science labs. So that, interestingly enough, was not a point that was drawn out during the discussion, and I thought was just a really significant investment in student learning opportunities and shows what we can do in terms of consolidating resources and investing in a school. So that to me is very significant. There's lots of data in here that I think is interesting. Going forward, I think the school climate data 2 years out will be important for us, but we can't disaggregate that data because it's collected anonymously. So we can only look at that from a school perspective. And I think the other thing is we've learned a lot in this process. There's certainly been some value in the monitoring. We know, for example, what the impact was with a decision made in February for implementation in September. And we know that the ongoing renovations in that time period were challenging. But what this can't tell us at all is whether or not making that decision and having a delayed impact 2 years later would have had on market share, enrollment, any of those things, right? So it only tells the story that it tells, but it certainly does a lot to inform our practice about the work we do once we make a decision and the resources we allocate to support the decision and the resources and time we invest working with the community and the school staff to make sure that integration goes well, and in particular the modeling between the two schools to really build that community culture from the beginning. And I think, to Trustee Ellis's broader concern, that sense of community engagement in that process, right? And that's one piece we've continued to see. So I think there are lots of good lessons from this, and others may have other things to it.
Through you, Madam Chair. I was not here for that process, but I certainly have had the benefit of visiting at Gloucester, spending time with students, and in fact, learning something from the students in person, not just from video and the reporting back. One of the things in listening to this conversation I would just caution is we need to be careful with data, because data answers questions. We are not directed by data, but we ask the questions, and data helps to inform the questions, the answers to the questions sometimes. Sometimes, though, and I know trustees raised the question about the value of qualitative data, and when we're asked the question, our chair has asked us the question, what has been most valuable? I would suggest to you that when we're talking about impacting the quality of student experiences, that the voice of students is probably the most valuable data we can collect in this particular kind of scenario, because we can't necessarily draw consistent or truthful conclusions about simply the numbers. And so I think that any kind of transition that involves communities, people, children, questions around their experiences and their voices in that experience is extremely valuable. I'd also like to just caution a consideration around the difference between causation and correlation. And so when it is that we draw, as we get further and further away from the root of the experience, we need to be careful about getting data and drawing causation conclusions about that, because as we get further and further away from where it happened, and I'm thinking about the EQAO discussion, when we think about any data in all of our schools around EQAO, when we see changes in some of our assessment data, it begs a variety of questions, and throughout the entire district, there have been opportunities where we've seen blips and changes that could be attributed to a variety of different experiences. So after a certain point, you have to ask the question, well, does the EQAO data, is it attributed to a particular change, or is it attributed to other experiences that students are having? So just those are some of the thoughts that resonated with me as I was listening to the conversation here.
Thanks very much for that response. I guess one of the things that strikes me when I look at the guiding questions, how will this information be used to inform board decisions? How will the work benefit students, et cetera? I think one of our biggest challenges always is knowing what questions to ask. And when we're dealing with something that is basically for the original cohort of students moving, is a phased change, then it's something that maybe needs us to be asking different questions every year, because things are different. And if we keep on looking at the grade 9 students over and over again, we are, when they're in grade 9, they're different students every year. And today, this year, maybe the pattern of how many of them attend Gloucester is different from what it would have been if we were still operating Gloucester and Rideau. So we don't even know if these are the students who would have necessarily gone to Gloucester or gone to Rideau, because they might have gone to Catholic schools, they might have gone to private schools, they might have asked for student transfers. So I think we have to be really careful what questions we ask, and consider whether or not we should be asking different questions. I'm not saying we shouldn't be doing this report again, because I think there are still things to be learned, particularly from the qualitative data. I'm not sure that we need as much of it next time, because we're that one more year further out. And the comment I wanted to make was with regard to the Presto passes, because if I'm recalling the attendance boundary maps properly in my head, and the amount of time I spent playing with Google Maps and how far things were when we were making the decision, I do believe that the vast majority of the Rideau attendance boundary does qualify for transportation regardless, and so I don't think it would be a great burden necessarily to continue to see the Presto Pass decision stand for all of the students from that attendance boundary. Thank you.
You can have the chair back.
And I didn't see any more hands go up. Did you see any more hands go up? Which means that if we're finished with that item this time, I will remember to ask for someone to move to return to board rules. Trustee Huff. And that's seconded by Trustee Schwartz. All those in favor? And moving on then to the remainder of our agenda here, with many thanks to staff for bringing this and for staying so long and being patient with our questions. A report from our OPSPA representative, if required, if there is any.
We have none tonight. Thank you.
And any matters for information, any new business? And since we've come to the end of our agenda, I declare this meeting adjourned. Thank you all very much.